The sun was low over the vast horizon, its dying glow painting the sky in molten shades of gold and crimson as the dry wind swept across the plains, carrying whispers of stories older than the land itself. Luke Carter had ridden since dawn, dust caking his boots and hat, searching for a stray calf that had broken through the fence somewhere near the canyon. He was a man of few words, built from hard years and harder lessons, his hands calloused from rope and saddle, his heart hardened by loss he rarely spoke of. The ranch was all he had left after the fever took his wife 3 winters ago, leaving him with an empty home and too many quiet mornings. The world had turned into a rhythm of survival, ride, mend, feed, rest, but no spark remained in his eyes. He didn't notice, in his exhaustion and stubborn determination, that he had wandered far beyond his land, crossing into a stretch of valley the locals called the Hollow Mesa, sacred ground belonging to the Apache, a place where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature began to fall sharply, and Luke, realizing his mistake, turned his horse to leave. But before he could find his bearings, the gelding stumbled on loose rock, throwing him to the ground with a sharp cry. Pain exploded in his leg, broken or close to it, and his horse bolted into the fading light. He lay there, cursing through clenched teeth, the canyon swallowing his voice. The night crept in cold and merciless, stars cutting across the black sky like shards of glass. He tried to drag himself toward the slope, but the pain was searing. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, before he heard soft footsteps, light as mist. A figure appeared from the shadows, a woman wrapped in deerskin, her dark hair glinting like obsidian in the starlight, a feather tied near her temple swaying in the wind. Her eyes were calm yet piercing, reflecting both strength and sorrow, and Luke, dazed with pain and disbelief, thought he might be seeing a ghost. She said nothing at first, only crouched beside him, her hands gentle yet sure as she examined his leg. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured finally, her voice quiet but steady, carrying the kind of authority that needed no force to be obeyed. "This is land meant for peace, not trespass." Luke, gritting his teeth, tried to speak. "Didn't mean to. My horse ran off." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded, as if deciding something. Without another word, she motioned for him to stay still, then disappeared into the darkness. When she returned, she carried herbs, a strip of hide, and a gourd of water. She worked quickly, setting his leg with calm precision, her touch both firm and strangely comforting. Luke, half delirious, wanted to thank her but couldn't find words that fit. The pain dulled under her care, and exhaustion pulled him into restless sleep. When he awoke, dawn had come softly, light filtering through the red rock walls of the canyon. The woman was sitting nearby, tending a small fire, the scent of sage and wild roots drifting in the air. She turned as he stirred. "You'll live," she said simply, handing him a bowl of steaming broth. "But you will need days before you can ride again." Luke looked around, realizing he was deep within Apache land. "You're taking a risk helping me," he said, his voice rough. "Your people don't take kindly to ranchers." The woman's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Some among mine believe that kindness is a gift, not a debt," she replied softly. "And once, long ago, a stranger saved my brother from a flood near the river. That stranger wore boots like yours." Something in her tone made Luke's chest tighten. He ate in silence, feeling a strange peace settle over him, though he couldn't explain why. Over the next days, as his leg mended under her care, Luke learned her name, Ayanna. She spoke little of herself but much of the land, how every stone, every stream, had spirit and purpose. She showed him how to listen to the wind and how to read the flight of birds as signs of coming weather. In return, Luke told her of ranch life, the endless work, the loneliness that comes from losing something you can never replace. Ayanna listened, her eyes reflecting quiet understanding, and sometimes a faint smile curved her lips, though it never reached the sadness behind her calm. One evening, as the sunset bled into violet dusk, she brought out a carved wooden flute and played. The melody floated through the canyon, haunting and beautiful, carrying stories Luke didn't need words to understand: loss, love, survival, and faith that something greater watched over it all. That night, as he lay under the stars, Luke felt something stir in him for the first time in years, a warmth that wasn't from the fire, a yearning he thought had died with his wife. Ayanna, sitting by the flames, looked up at the same sky, her face illuminated by the soft glow. "The spirits guide those who are lost," she said quietly, as if speaking to the night itself. "Sometimes, being lost is how we are found." Her words sank deep into him. When the time came for him to leave, his legs strong enough to bear weight, he hesitated. He didn't want to go, not yet. But Ayanna stood by the path, her expression gentle but resolute. "Your world waits for you, Luke Carter," she said. "And mine must remain as it is. Some crossings are not meant to last." He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. She pressed a small carved pendant into his palm, a bird with outstretched wings. "This is for remembering," she whispered. "Not of me, but of what you found here." Then she stepped back, and before he could reply, she turned and disappeared among the rocks, her figure melting into the morning mist. Luke rode home with a heart heavier than he expected, the pendant warm against his chest. Seasons passed. The ranch began to flourish again. He hired hands, rebuilt fences, and, slowly, laughter returned to the house that had been silent for too long. Yet sometimes, when dawn painted the sky the color of flame, he would hear the faint echo of a flute in the wind and feel her presence, calm and watching. Years later, when drought hit the valley and his cattle began to die, Luke rode once more toward the mesas, desperate to find water, desperate to keep his people alive. Following an old instinct, he rode toward the place he once swore never to enter again. The land looked unchanged, timeless. But as he neared the canyon, he noticed something. Where once had been dry sand, a thin stream now flowed, clear and cold. Nearby stood a weathered totem carved with the shape of a bird with outstretched wings. Luke dismounted slowly, heart pounding. He knelt by the water, cupping it in his rough hands, and whispered her name to the wind. In that moment, a warm gust swept across the valley, carrying the scent of sage and the faint sound of a flute. He closed his eyes, knowing without understanding that she had never really left, that her spirit had become part of the land itself, watching over those who came with respect and need. The stream never dried after that. His cattle lived, and the valley prospered once more. Luke, now an old man, would sit by that same water each evening, telling young ranch hands about the woman who healed him when he was broken, who taught him that kindness could cross any border, land, heart, or soul. "The land remembers," he would say softly, gazing toward the glowing mesa. "And if you listen closely enough, it speaks." Sometimes, in the hush between sunset and night, when the sky turned to silver and the stars began their slow dance, he would swear he saw her silhouette at the canyon's edge, standing proud and still, watching over him with eyes full of peace. He would lift his head in quiet respect, whispering, "Thank you, Ayanna," before turning back home. And though no one else ever saw her, those who worked his ranch spoke of a strange comfort that lingered in the wind, a blessing that seemed to follow the Carter lands wherever they went. Luke lived long, loved deeply, and when he finally passed, they buried him near that stream beneath the open sky. And on the night of his passing, the wind rose soft and steady, carrying the melody of a wooden flute through the valley, a song of reunion, of gratitude, of souls who found each other beyond the bounds of this world. The ranchers who heard it never forgot, for they swore that even in the silence that followed, the land itself seemed to hum with quiet joy. The morning had started like any other in the wide, sun-baked plains of northern Arizona. The air shimmered with heat even before noon, and the distant mesas glowed copper under the vast desert sky. Jack Monroe had been up since dawn, checking fences and water lines across his family's ranch, 1,000 acres of stubborn earth that had belonged to his father, and his father before him. The land was tough, but so was Jack. At 42, his life had become a pattern of sweat, solitude, and silent endurance. His wife had left 3 years ago, unable to handle the long silences and endless work. His only son, Sam, had gone off to college in Phoenix and rarely called. Jack told himself he didn't mind, that he preferred it this way, but in truth, the emptiness echoed louder than any storm. He lived for the rhythm of ranching, the creak of leather, the scent of dust and sage, the low bellow of cattle moving across dry pasture. That day, chasing a stray bull that had broken through the north fence, he rode farther than he meant to. The land sloped downward, into a stretch he didn't recognize, untouched desert framed by jagged cliffs and ancient pinon trees. His GPS had lost signal miles ago, but he figured he'd circle back soon enough. He didn't notice the weather shifting, the light dimming as clouds rolled in from the west, heavy with rain. Within minutes, a sudden storm broke loose, the kind that comes fast and fierce in the desert. Thunder cracked across the sky, and his horse spooked, rearing violently. Jack tried to steady it, but the animal bolted. The world blurred into rain and red earth before everything went black. When he woke, it was night. His horse was gone, his phone cracked, and his head throbbed. The air was cold now, and silence pressed down like a weight. He realized he was in a canyon, surrounded by steep walls. He cursed under his breath, pushing himself upright, but his ankle screamed in pain. That's when he saw her, a silhouette against the firelight. She stepped forward slowly, the glow revealing a woman wrapped in a woven shawl, her dark hair braided, her eyes steady and deep as still water. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "This is sacred ground." Jack blinked, still disoriented. "I didn't mean to trespass," he rasped. "Got thrown off my horse in the storm." She studied him for a moment, then nodded as if weighing his truth. "You're hurt," she said finally. "Come." He hesitated but followed, limping toward her small camp nestled under an overhang. A pot of stew simmered on the fire, and the air smelled of sage and juniper. She handed him a blanket and a cup of water. "Thank you," he muttered, his pride prickling. She said nothing, tending to his ankle with surprising gentleness, wrapping it with strips of cloth soaked in something cool and fragrant. "I'm Ayanna," she said after a while. "This land belongs to my people. You crossed into it." Jack grimaced. "Didn't mean to. I was looking for a bull." Her lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "Your bull must be very special to make you ride through a storm into sacred land." He almost laughed but stopped when he met her gaze. There was no anger there, only a calm strength that made him uneasy. The storm raged on outside, and they sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind howl through the rocks. Eventually, Jack spoke again. "I'll leave in the morning," he said. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." Ayanna stirred the fire, sparks rising like tiny stars. "Sometimes we don't choose where we're meant to go," she said softly. "Sometimes the land chooses us." Her words lingered in the air, strange and comforting. Over the next day, the rain continued, trapping them together in the canyon. Jack's phone was dead, and even if it weren't, there was no service. Ayanna shared her food and stories, tales of her ancestors, the mountains, the spirits that watched over the valley. She spoke of respect, not ownership, of how the land was alive, breathing, and that every step taken on it mattered. Jack listened, something stirring deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet wonder. He told her about the ranch, about how it was dying from drought and debt. How he'd tried to keep it running out of loyalty to his father, but the land had been turning against him, the earth cracked, the wells running dry. "Maybe the land isn't turning against you," she said. "Maybe it's asking to be understood." He frowned. "It's just dirt and fences." Ayanna smiled faintly. "To you, maybe, but not to those who listen." That night, as they sat by the fire, she took out a small hand drum and began to sing, a soft, rhythmic chant that echoed through the canyon like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The sound seemed to vibrate inside Jack, calming something restless in him. He watched her in the firelight, her face serene, and thought she looked timeless, like the desert itself. When morning came, the storm had passed. She helped him climb out of the canyon, guiding him along a narrow trail that overlooked miles of untouched beauty, red cliffs, green sage, and the distant shimmer of a hidden spring. "There," she said, pointing. "That water runs deep. It feeds this whole valley." Jack stared, stunned. His ranch bordered this land. He had spent years fighting drought, never knowing water ran just beyond his fences. "It crosses into your property underground," she added. "But the path is blocked by old debris, collapsed rock from years ago. If you clear it, the water will flow again." He turned to her, speechless. "Why are you telling me this?" Ayanna met his eyes. "Because the land gives to those who honor it. You came here lost, and it showed you what you needed to see." She handed him a small leather pouch filled with herbs. "For your ankle," she said. "And for remembering." Then she smiled, gentle, knowing, and before he could say another word, she turned and walked back toward the canyon, vanishing into the morning sun. Jack stood there for a long time, the wind warm on his face, his heart full of something he couldn't name. When he finally made it back home, his foreman nearly fainted at the sight of him. "Thought you were dead, boss," the man said. "You've been gone 3 days." Jack just nodded, limping toward the barn, the leather pouch still in his hand. Over the next week, he followed Ayanna's directions, tracing the dry creek bed near the north pasture until he found a mound of rock and silt wedged deep in the gully. It took days of digging with his tractor, but one morning, as the sun rose, a thin trickle of water burst free, cold, clear, and alive. It spread across the parched earth, filling troughs and low ground, until the whole field shimmered with new life. Word spread fast. Neighbors came to see the miracle, calling it luck or fate, but Jack knew better. He rebuilt his ranch with renewed purpose, planting trees along the stream and setting aside land for the native plants and birds Ayanna had told him about. He even reached out to the nearby Apache community, offering partnership instead of distance, inviting them to bless the water that now sustained his ranch. They came, solemn and proud, and among them was Ayanna, standing quietly at the back, her eyes shining with approval. When the ceremony ended, she walked up to him, her hand brushing the pendant he now wore, a small turquoise bird she had left in the pouch. "The land remembers kindness," she said. "And so do we." Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said. Ayanna smiled. "Then repay it by listening. Keep this land alive, not just for you, but for everyone it touches." Years passed. The Monroe Ranch became known across the region, not just for its thriving herds, but for its environmental revival. Jack started a foundation to support water conservation on shared lands, bringing ranchers and tribes together in a way no one had thought possible. Reporters came and went, stories were written, but Jack rarely gave interviews. He preferred the quiet work, the planting, the listening, the mending of fences, both real and human. Sometimes, at dusk, when the wind swept over the fields carrying the scent of sage, he would close his eyes and hear the faint rhythm of a drum echoing from the canyon, steady and sure. On those nights, he'd stand by the stream and whisper a thank you into the wind, knowing she could hear him somehow. When old age finally caught up with him, and his son took over the ranch, Jack left behind a simple note in his journal: "The land speaks if you listen." And sometimes, when you're lost, it sends someone to guide you home. They buried him under the cottonwood near the stream, and at his memorial, the wind rose strong and steady, rustling the leaves like a gentle applause. Far off, beyond the mesas, thunder rolled softly, not in warning, but in blessing, and those who stood there swore they could hear the faint beat of a drum, fading into the horizon.